There is a city in Canada. It is called Brampton, Ontario. In 2001, Brampton was 60% European. In 2021, it was 18% European. In that time span, the South Asian population grew to a staggering 52%. Brampton, Ontario, is one of the most striking examples of Canada's astonishing demographic change. A city called Surrey, British Columbia, has undergone a similar change in a similar period of time. The ethnic transformation of Canada is likely the most rapid of any European country. This change has been entirely negative, and you don't have to take my word for it. Between 2016 and 2021, Brampton lost 6,000 people who were originally born in Canada, meaning Canadians from Canada who have experienced this change firsthand don't like it. And anecdotally, Brampton is viewed the same way in Canada as a city like Detroit or Baltimore is in America. Those who view this demographic tidal wave favorably are either ideological fanatics or generally ignorant of the forklift crash that is Brampton, Ontario. When I say ideological fanatics, this term is synonymous with our ruling or political class. In 2013, then Mayor of Brampton, Susan Fennell, as well as some other officials took a trip to the former British Raj to advertise the Greater Toronto Area as an ideal destination for immigrants. Well, an ideal destination for stealing cars and forming gangs. This video will not be covering the consequences of mass immigration. My focus here is to elucidate two things. First is how such an extreme and ridiculous program was allowed to be implemented at all, and the second is why the ruling political class is able to simply enforce their will on everyone else. States are always governed by a minority of people compared to the general population. In every state, there is always a class that rules and a class that is ruled. And in every state, the class that does all the ruling is less numerous than the ruled. The ruled are controlled and directed by the rulers, which do it through means that may be legal or not, and may be arbitrary or violent. In turn, the ruled provide the material means of subsistence and the instrumentalities that are essential for the continued existence of the state. In practical life, we all recognize the existence of this ruling class. The Canadian Parliament, the mechanism by which laws are created, has 443 members, split between the House of Commons and the Senate. Notice anything? Those who issue laws are always fewer in number than those who obey them. 443 is a comically small, pathetic, and shameful number compared to the some 25 million Canadians who exist and the 15 million others. Foreign affairs, the management of land, and national defense, and the feeding of Hermann Göring are all directed by small, group-like cliques which receive virtually no input from the public. In 2023, Canada's Immigration Minister, Mark Miller, indicated his intention to introduce a plan permitting up to 600,000 illegal aliens to apply for citizenship. This maneuver wasn't really surprising since Miller wants 1.5 million people to come to Canada between 2024 and 2026. That amounts to 500,000 people a year. They need to reach that number somehow. Canadians were never asked about allowing 600,000 people with unknown backgrounds, people who have broken the law by overstaying their visas to get citizenship. As in every other domain, immigration is managed by a minority of influential actors like Mark Miller. Willingly or unwillingly, Canadians defer to this small minority. To unwillingly defer is a very accurate term, since a majority of Canadians are already discontent with this bottom-of-the-barrel policy, reminiscent of Hoi 4. 40% of Canadians believe there are too many people who have their racial origins outside of Europe in Canada, while 37% believe that le grand remplacement is a deliberate political process. 67% of Canadians want less immigration, according to a November 2023 Abacus poll. And also, 75% believe that this level of ethnocide will put on social services, housing, and infrastructure will reduce their quality of life. Despite popular opinion being against ethnic cleansing, the entire period from 2020 to 2024 has seen an unprecedented human wave drowning our country. Note, the numbers on screen only count permanent residents. The amount of people in total coming to Canada includes including temporary residents, has come close to or exceeded 1 million in some of those years. Canada has one of the fastest growing populations in the world, with a 3.2% increase in 2023. This outpaces Afghanistan, a country with one of the highest fertility rates in the world at 4.6 children per woman. In 2022, Afghanistan's population grew by 2.3%, according to the CIA World Factbook. Only a few African countries, among them Angola and Benin, have a population growth rate that is higher than Canada's. We were never consulted on this. Even more, there is general ignorance of these facts among the Canadian population. This immigration program is top-down, and it is one of the clearest examples of the ruling class openly enforcing their will on everyone else. Why stop at Canada? Recent polling in America, France, and Australia have shown their immigration policies to be widely unpopular too. Yet, in every case, in every country, popular sovereignty has fallen. Millions must be tortured. The fact that there is a class performing all the political functions, a ruling class that is, in countries that are supposedly subservient to the popular will has serious consequences, since the ruling class, which can be accurately described as a pedo cabal, makes all meaningful decisions. It means the riffraff can never achieve sovereignty. The popular will can be entirely or partially circumvented by policy makers. How? What? It might seem wrong to think that a tiny clique can dominate billions. However, the cabal is able to continue to exist and torment me personally because they are small. It is easier for 10 people to coordinate and follow a single line of action because they are just a few. Inversely, it is harder for 1,000 people to do the same because they are numerous. Disorganized groups are helpless against organized ones because they can be picked off one by one. There are few formal groups that stand against the Canadian ethnocide, even if the majority of Canadians want to end the ball flattening that is 500,000 people a year. This majority is not organized and is in discord. The biggest point of disagreement is the strict aversion to being called any form of white. The terms racist and xenophobic are big, heavy rocks the ruling class uses to crush and pulverize concerned citizens. The only organized group I can think of, which is the People's Party of Canada, has regularly been the victim of the pedo cabal's big, heavy rock. Why the People's Party became a target for the regime should be evident. They want an immigration moratorium. The PPC is a party for the disorganized and unenlightened masses. Even if Maxime Bernier wants to axe immigration, I'm just not confident in his party because of his blind belief in the will of the people. Elite or minority lobbying is at the origin of this crisis of mass immigration. The Advisory Council on Economic Growth was founded in 2016 by then Finance Minister Bill Morneau. The man who led this advisory council was Dominic Barton, the CEO of a multinational consulting firm called McKinsey & Co. between 2009 and 2018. Have you ever noticed that rich people tend to have all the political power? Dominic Barton is one of these rich people. The council had 13 recommendations. One of them was to increase permanent immigration to 450,000 a year. With just over 450,000 people coming to Canada each year since 2021, it's safe to say that the advice of this council was followed. Dominic Barton wasn't put on as the head of the advisory council as a blank slate, as in 2011 he co-founded the lobbying group called the Century Initiative. The goal of the Century Initiative is to increase Canada's population to 100 million by 2100. Mark Weissman was the other founder of the Century Initiative. As fate always shines a light on this tribe, Weissman comes from the tunnels. Weissman sleeps on stained mattresses in the NYC Metro. Weissman wears a tiny hat and puts his hands and forehead on some random wall in occupied Palestine. Also, as if this wasn't stereotypical enough, Weissman has connections to BlackRock and the WEF. One thing to note is that the Conference Board of Canada, a separate body from the Advisory Council, suggested that immigration should be increased to 407,000 by 2030 in 2016. This report was cited by the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. but I see that more as a coincidence than, as some people have suggested, a means of shifting responsibility away from the Century Initiative. This is nothing more than a trivial fact when the amount of immigration suggested by the Advisory Council was in line with the number that the Century Initiative advocated for, which is to say, the Century Initiative is responsible for the huge increase in foreign transplants. Often, there are formal figureheads of state which are sovereign only on paper. The most obvious example is that in all contemporary Christian kingdoms, prime ministers are in charge while the monarch is not involved in the decision-making process. What might not be so obvious are the times when a president or prime minister are not the people who administer. In democracies, it's not uncommon for an influential person who has procured the election of a politician to hold more power than the politician. The politician, Justin Trudeau, has never governed in any meaningful way. For his first term, starting in 2015, it was Gerald Butts, an influential person who procured his election that governed for him. When Gerald Butts was sacked following the 2019 SNC-Lavalin affair, Trudeau's government was briefly left headless. Since 2021, the Liberal government has spent $117 million on an American consulting firm called McKinsey & Co. to govern for Trudeau. In contrast, Stephen Harper's government spent $2.2 million on this consulting firm. Recall, Dominic Barton, co-founder of the Century Initiative, was the head of McKinsey & Co. The new major domo of Trudeau is Dominic Barton. I'm the only person courageous enough to say that America is running Canada's domestic policy. The reason the Trudeau government turned to this American consulting firm is probably due to incompetence. There has been a serious degeneration of the ruling class, so it's just easier for them to pay an American firm to govern instead. For Lipschitz, their brains are smooth and thinking is very hard. Don't be too critical of them. I am now going to cite a CBC article. Even though I don't like the CBC, it still demonstrates the point well.
McKinsey's influence over Canadian immigration policy has grown in recent years without the public's knowledge, according to two sources within immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada. Both held major roles within the department during the height of the consulting firm's influence. Ottawa announced a plan this fall to welcome 500,000 new permanent residents each year by 2025, with an emphasis on fostering economic growth. The target and its stated justification follows similar conclusions in the 2016 report of the Advisory Council on Economic Growth. John McCallum, the immigration minister at the time, expressed his reservations about the huge figure presented in the report, but one of the sources at IRCC said the department was quickly told that the Advisory Council's report was a foundational plan.
Later in the CBC article, McKinsey & Co. is described as a shadow government. That should be scary, but I'm a stone-cold Trusa. Of note, Trudeau ordered an investigation into McKinsey and found that little wrong had been done, but it's like the mafia investigates the mafia and finds no wrongdoing. Okay, I don't care. When researching this video, I had three main points of inquiry. The first was The Populist Delusion by Nima Parvini, which introduced me to the subject of organized minorities. The second was Gaetano Mosca's book, The Ruling Class, which nearly all of the political theory I explain here originates. And the third was that the Century Initiative was obviously an organized minority who were enforcing their will in Canada, so I had to look into it. I wrongly believed that the Century Initiative was entirely a Canadian creation. The global American empire influences everything. Also, while researching, I did not expect what I would find to fit so decisively and cleanly with Mosca's thesis of the ruling class. And no one was ever asked if the Century Initiative should be implemented. It simply was. This is a point worth stressing because no amount of the people's pressure is going to make our political class reverse course on this. And if they do, it will not have been a triumph of democracy over the elites, but because it's an untenable undertaking that undermines and imperils their power. This is what Toronto looks like in right now. Voters don't choose representatives. When you look at a ballot, all of the names on there were either pre-selected by a party or have put in some efforts to have the privilege of being on there. This is not in any meaningful way representative of the interests of millions of voters. Given the opportunity to vote for truly representative representatives, that is, allowing us to vote for anyone in the general population, you would see that votes would be scattered among thousands of people. Without organization and limiting candidates, it would be impossible for millions to come to the conclusion that they should coalesce around a small selection of candidates and parties. In order for votes to be effective at all, each voter is forced to limit his choice to a very narrow field. In other words, to a choice among the 2 or 3 persons who have some chance of succeeding, and the only ones who have any chance of succeeding are those whose candidacies are championed by groups, by committees, by organized minorities. To go a step further, these politicians are among the few people who have the capacity for leadership. Quote,
"In elections, as in all other manifestations of social life, those who have the will, and especially the moral, intellectual and material means to force their will upon others, will take the lead over the others and command them."
If you've watched my channel before, I'm sure you've heard that a politician is elected by his friends. Their friends are often extremely wealthy lobbyists who can afford to make black men do the thug shaker. Using their infinite money, they compulsively bribe every single elected official to represent the interests of the pedo cabal over and above the interests of Europeans. Such wealthy lobbyists have the necessary resources to control and manipulate social media, which in turn controls the dissemination of information and hence the formation of individual opinions. Other viable candidates, meaning those who have the reasonable chance of elected, are also pre-selected by the cabal and will also serve their interests if elected. Even in the most charitable interpretation, representative democracy is simply elected oligarchy. Don't smile because we had the opportunity to destroy democracy once and for all. Cry because the central power is lost. In terms of elite lobbying, what better example than Dominic Barton, the CEO of a multinational consulting firm who is the source of Canada's tumor. The tumor of mass immigration, that is. Moreover, the Century Initiative has powerful corporate partners that include basically all of Canada's banking sector, including CIBC, Scotiabank, BMO, and TD Bank. Of the 7 Century Initiative board members, 4 have ties to the corporate sector. I'll put them on screen if you want to know. When I say politicians are elected by their friends, do you now see who Justin Trudeau's friends are? Explaining the economics of housing costs and mortgages is just beyond the scope of this video. There was an article republished by Dominion Review that explains how banks profit from mass immigration. Here, I will just say that from their donations, the official policy of Canadian banks and the financial sector in general is to support ethnocide. In a 2023 report, all Canadian banks that I previously listed were cited as donors to the Century Initiative. How much they donated, I don't know. It's not public information. Moreover, the Century Initiative has influenced public opinion through publishing reports, producing videos, and creating social media hashtags. And academia loves ethnocide and Minecraft branded food, as the lobbying group has been the subject of sympathetic pieces by Terence Corcoran in the Financial Post. 100 million Canadians? We could only hope. And Andrew Coyne, increased immigration is good for Canada, and the reasons aren't only economic. In 2017, Doug Saunders published a book titled Maximum Canada: Why 35 Million Canadians Aren't Enough, in which he echoes the Century Initiative's goal of growing Canada's population to 100 million. I'm sure that for many of you watching, this is your first time hearing about the Century Initiative and its influence in both the Canadian government and on society. In the 2019 and 2021 federal elections, the Liberals did not campaign on the 100 million plan. No one ever campaigns on immigration, in defiance of its purported popularity among the Canadian population. This deafening silence has literally always been the case. Recall that other candidates too represent minority interests. In the 2025 election platform of the Conservative Party, the only limitation they're considering implementing is ending birthright citizenship. That's it. That's all. That's literally everything Pierre Poilievre has to say about bringing in 500,000 people a year. In addition, the now deceased Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney supported the Century Initiative, which isn't surprising since...
On Brian Mulroney's watch, Canada almost tripled the number of immigrants coming each year, from fewer than 90,000 people to more than 250,000.
When Poilievre gets elected in 2025, I want you to remind yourself every day that there is no democratic solution to this. There is no democratic solution.
Stop the deportations. Listen, we have a worker shortage in Canada. We have a demographic problem. Our population is too old. So, shame on Justin Trudeau for trying to deport these wonderful students. Stop the deportations. Keep the students here. Allow them to apply just like everyone else for permanent residency. The Conservatives will continue to
It's not an exaggeration to say that the immigration policy we are suffering is one of the most radical ones in world history, if not the most radical. Why is there not general resistance to it? There are two reasons. The first is that even if a sentiment against immigration exists, sentiments can't edge. Fighting any political battle is a game of elites versus elites. As Kaiser Wilhelm II said, we try to convince our opponents with the weapon of truth. As well as other weapons, we have political weapons, but someone needs to use them. We have not organized anything to challenge the elites, therefore there is no resistance. But secondly, and more importantly, there is no antagonism between the state and society. The state is part of society and cannot be extricated from it. Sure, Canada is being ruined by a pedo cabal, but this cabal is filling a role that needs to be filled. Given that nobody else, including anyone who believes in Ausländer raus, has stepped in to fill this role, nothing will change. To clarify, this political role needs to be filled because a stateless society is a lie and not even a good one. Contrary to classical liberal belief, we do not enter society. We, as humans, have no choice but to be compelled into societies because socialization and cooperation are inextricable realities of our existence. Wherever a large number of humans are gathered, there will be a society. And because the management of power, otherwise known as politics, is something that societies naturally generate, every society will form a state. That is to say, there is no separation between the state and society. The state performs the political function that society requires. Even if Toronto and Vancouver are turning into unbearably expensive homeless dumps, the majority of Canadians still believe that the ruling class is reliable enough to be governing. We Canadians, including myself, are willing to tolerate Infinity Indians for the privilege of being abused by a pedo cabal, the proposition of an ultra-monarchist Nazi regime, and therefore an actual change of elites is frightful and spooky for Canadians. In other words, I hope that a housing shortage and excessive inflation act as a time-traveling device where the breakdown of democracy happens sooner than usual. Did you know that Canadians are so poor that we pay for gym memberships with pennies we collect off the ground? The issue is not that the government exists, it's that it's being run in the wrong way for the wrong reasons. So, for improvement, there needs to be a change in the people who perform the political function. Just in reference to the foundation of any state, there is no difference between autocracies founded on coercion and force and democracies founded on voluntary associations and trade. This is because all states are both voluntary and coercive. Voluntary because it's in our nature to want a society and therefore a state, and coercive because we can't live any other way. A complete regime change is the only thing that can permanently actualize the dream of Ausländer raus. Recent developments in Germany and Britain indicate both are headed in the direction of immigration restriction, but don't be surprised if this is just a maneuver for containment and very little actually changes. Democracies with constitutions will tend towards universalizing and abstracting the ethnicities they govern. Any country that has been a democracy for a long enough time will eventually qualify citizenship by belief in the doctrines of equality and liberty. That's why any shitlib that may watch this video will call me un-Canadian. For them, being Canadian is not racial, it's a set of beliefs that anyone can choose to believe in at any time. Close to everyone in Canada's elite is in favor of mass immigration. There is agreement between leaders of different parties, academic institutions, and think tanks are on the same page. There are influential lobbyists working day and night to advance the immigrationist agenda, and the elites conduct rearguard actions against those opposed to their policies. You might ask, can this be stopped? Can this be reversed? Can Canada really change gender to Brazil? There is no need need to be anxious about these questions. I will say the same thing which I've always said. 1. Go to Google. 2. Download 5,000 volumes of ancient Indo-European history and religion written by ethno-traditionalist pagans of the West. If Google asks you about what you're doing, just say you're becoming a schizo-erudite scholar of tradition. 3. With your newfound knowledge, date a socially awkward, extremist, single pagan woman. This is what Kaiser Wilhelm II refers to when he says, as well as other weapons. This video may appear demoralizing. If you perceive it that way, that's a you problem. I'm just explaining what is happening to Canada. Against all claims by democracy believers, the organized minority always holds dominion over the disorganized majority. The link to the Q&A is in the description. It is unlisted, so check that out if you want to.